welcome back to Long Walk Talks Lost. My name is David Hensley. I will be your pilot this afternoon, and I am joined today by my two co-pilots.
Cara.
Robert Bradford.
And today we are going to be continuing our 20-year Lost retrospective by talking about the next 4 episodes. That's 5, 6, 7, and 8, which I have the titles of written down here. White Rabbit, House of the Rising Sun, The Moth, and Confidence Man. I don't know why the titles of the first 4 episodes were so deeply ingrained in my head, and yet these 4 I cannot seem to remember.
I mean, it helped that half of the first batch of episodes were just pilot part 1, pilot part 2, which is usually a pretty safe guess for TV episodes.
Yeah, that usually tends to get the job done. All right. So overall, before we dive into actual discussion topics, which, as I told Robert and Cara last night when I sent these out, I need a better method for distinguishing between discussion topics and my random notes that I take when I'm watching these. But before we dive in, what were your overall thoughts on this 4-episode arc that we watched last week?
It's interesting how quickly the show gets into its rhythm, which, given that they're still early enough that there can still be discoveries and changes to the status quo, like finding the caves, finding Sayid leaving at the end to find the source of the transmission. But just how quickly they get into the pattern of, okay, position this character for the place where we can now see more of their story. Something I'd forgotten how gracefully they do is kind of soft focus the person who's about to get their spotlight in the episodes ahead of it. So you have kind of Charlie dealing with his dwindling supply of drugs and then going to the caves and finding his guitar leading up to his actual episode, The Moth, or Sayid as an interrogator being teed up more and more until we end this episode setting up what's going to be his first episode that we'll get into next time. But it's really cool how they do that and just use that as sort of a way to start introducing and fleshing out the cast, even when they're not the focus of a particular episode.
That's a good point. It's to me, I guess as somebody who, doesn't really write or do any of that kind of stuff, I don't know how you can think that far ahead or try to figure out okay, how far do we need to go to set up for this thing that's, might be 2 or 3 episodes down. Maybe it's just my brain doesn't work that way.
Well, I think it's interesting that at this point in the show, we're now kind of course correcting because, no pun intended, because we talked a lot in the first 2 episodes about how Kate was supposed to be the protagonist. And I think it's pretty clearly set up that Locke was supposed to be the antagonist in the long run. So they get the first 2 flashback episodes. But now that we've had to pivot and make Jack the main character, here we start off this batch with him getting his first flashback episode, where you would think that would have been one of the earlier ones, but instead here we are at episode 5. So let's dive into it. We're going to be discussing these mostly in order, but we might jump around a little bit. But right off the bat, in episode 5, we get the moment from Charlie that has very long-term consequences, where he runs up to Jack on the beach and tells him that Joanna, one of the survivors, is out at sea and drowning, and he tells Jack, "I don't swim," which if you jump ahead 2 seasons, 2.5 seasons to the end of season 3, he does.
Yep. And it's not even he could have learned on the island. He explicitly notes that his dad taught him to swim when he was a kid.
Yeah. So what do we think? Is this foreshadowing, character development, or continuity error? And I say foreshadowing because I've seen people on Reddit make the argument that he wasn't lying here, which doesn't really make sense, but they're saying that Charlie knew he was going to die, didn't plan on making a return trip. He only had it in him to get down there to that station.
Well, just because you don't swim doesn't mean you can't swim.
Well, that's a good point.
I do see what David's saying, though, in the context of there's a person drowning out there, someone needs to help, and Charlie's saying, well, I can't do it because. But yeah, and I'm going to put myself kind of in team continuity error here because, yeah, to volunteer for what he's doing at the end of season 3, it's look, you're not going to help anybody if you drown on the way there. You need to have confidence that you can actually reach it and do what you need to do. So, yeah, that was just one of those things where it's well, there needs to be a reason Jack does it. So who's someone who, probably who doesn't need to be set up to have this skill set. You have more rugged people like Kate and Locke, who would seem like they'd be able to take action there. So have somebody who couldn't do it themselves come tell Jack, and they just picked Charlie for it. But yeah, it's one of those things that gets retconned later on.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to chalk this up as. Maybe other than just bad writing, because like Robert said, we needed a reason to get Jack out there so that Jack could be the hero. Because that's what White Rabbit is all about, Jack's ability or inability to be a hero. Which, again, helping this argument is the fact that Boone is a terrible fucking lifeguard.
I would have loved it if Lacrosse isn't... Actually, no. I was going to say, like, it would be a joke if this happened, but I think it does happen, is that Boone's whole story is him being like, okay, I'm going to take on this task. Don't worry, I've got this, and then failing at it. Like, down the road, we're going to see him fail when he's supposed to be, like, on night watch when, you know, they're under threat from the others. We're going to see him fail to climb up to a plane and, you know, successfully, you know...
Not die in it?
We're going to see... Boone is going to fail a lot, and there's not really a point or a redemption or a great thing. He's just kind of a character who fails.
He just sucks. I hate him.
I mean, he couldn't even give CPR properly. It does make sense if he was like a lifeguard at a fancy, like gated pool community,
right?
Where he didn't really have to do a whole lot of like.
Or maybe they didn't have a deep end.
Yeah, exactly.
It was just a kiddie pool that was 3 feet deep.
Well, that was just my first observation. Like coming off of those first episodes where we talked about how bad Boone was at giving CPR, and now it's like, oh, you're supposed to be a lifeguard, but again, Jack needed to be the one to get out there. So I don't think it's too early in our show's run to talk about another recurring theme of Lost, which is bad dads. Just the worst.
I'm trying to think like of the number of characters, just and keeping it to the first season, like the original Survivor set. How many people have good functional relationships with good dads? Because you've got Jen and Kate are eventually revealed to have dads who are pretty solid dudes, but they don't have good relationship with them because of where their life choices have taken them. And then you've got Jack, Sawyer, Locke, good lord, who all have like horrible human beings for dads who have done just terrible things to ruin their lives. So Son's dad is basically a James Bond villain.
Yeah, sadly.
We haven't even gotten to Charles Widmore yet. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't think there is anybody who's just like... I think Charlie indicates that he's got some happy memories with his dad as a kid, but also there were some rough points as he got older. I feel like we have flashbacks to when he and his brother were kids. Yeah, I think daddy issues are pretty much across the board with this passenger manifest.
Well, it's to the point where there's a future episode called All the Best Cowboys Have Daddy Issues. But right off the bat, we have an early contender here with Christian Shepherd, who flat out tells his 12, 14-year-old son, however old Jack is supposed to be in this first flashback, you don't have what it takes.
And this is him walking into a study with bruises all over his face after getting the crap beaten out of him at school from a fight that explicitly he didn't start. He got into trying to help another kid. And his dad, who's a doctor, doesn't even be like, all right, son, let me help you get some ice on that. Let's talk. He's just like, wow, I guess this is what the whole course of your life's going to be like, huh?
Well, to be fair to Christian, he needed that ice for his scotch.
Such great sound design to have the first, like the lead into that flashback being the sound of ice cubes in his dad's glass.
Yeah. Cara, thoughts on Fathers and Lost? You look distressed.
Oh, man. He is just I don't even know what words to use. That's how frustrated I am. I can't even put a sentence together. He is a horrible, horrible person. I mean, I'm guessing this is probably a generational thing. His dad probably was mean to him, so he had to be mean to Jack and whatever. But I don't know, and his mom's delusional. Like, good God.
Well, what's interesting about that scene is that Jack comes in after having gotten beaten up trying to help a friend. And his dad's like, well, the reason I can succeed in life and you can't is because I had a really high-pressure surgery today, and the kid died, but I can handle it, so I'm a success.
Oh, God, I forgot about that.
So it's like he's describing a situation where, and I don't want to say that every time a patient dies, the doctor has failed, because sometimes that's just how human mortality works, but, Christian's describing a situation where he failed to save a kid, and he's spinning it like, well, that's why he's a real man and Jack is a little failure. So it's just a great, it's not a subtle scene. It's not a scene that's teasing out anything with particular finesse. But that is a nice note that it's not even just he's being a jerk to Jack. He's clearly throwing his own sense of failure and inadequacy onto his son.
And you're right about the subtlety, because that's actually going to be something we discuss later in the episode. Is at this point in the show, there is a complete and utter lack of subtlety altogether. We get a stark contrast between Jack and the hilariously named Christian Shepherd very early on here, and I think it's an odd decision that they draw out how long it takes for you to find out what it was that Jack did that pissed his father off so much. In the closer to modern day narrative, it's a minute before we find out that Jack ratted out his father for being drunk on the job. They don't mention that in the episode. It's just his mom going, "What you did."
Yeah, telling him, you don't get to say "I can't" after what you did.
And it's like, well, what the fuck did you do? That was so horrible. You jump ahead. I don't remember if it's this season or later.
I think it's Jack's second flashback episode is where we get this one.
So next week's episode, we'll talk about it. But his dad was drunk on the job and should not have been performing surgery. And yet he's treated like a pariah for doing
the right thing.
Yeah. But I mean, this is Lost, so the right thing isn't always the right thing, I guess.
I will say another an interesting thing watching the first season is the characters who show up as guest stars in these early flashbacks. And sometimes it's a person who will appear in one flashback and never again. And other times, whether they planned it or just it happened that way, it's someone who's a recurring character for the run of the show. And yeah, we're going to see a lot of John Terry as Christian Shepherd and as !, whatever we're seeing on the island. And again, for all we are talking about what a loathsome character he is, what a great performance. What a fantastic way of projecting authority and commanding presence that you can see how it cows Jack even after, he's dead. He's dead when they get to the island. And yeah, why Jack would react so viscerally to what, would seem like a good thing. Hey, your father, you thought he was dead, but his coffin's empty. And Jack destroys the coffin with a piece of metal because he needed his dad to be dead.
And I kind of think he wanted to, I don't know, maybe check the corpse off a cliff. Yeah. I like to think that that's what he wanted to do.
That was going to be his closure.
Yeah. Be like, bye, wee.
Locke, do you need boar bait?
Hey, that's a good idea.
And also a great band name, Boarbait. All right, so this is something that we don't find out, I think, until the last season of the show, which is that the Man in Black, which is the just colloquial name for the smoke monster, Jacob's adversary, which I think is how he's actually credited at one point. Esau, if you want to get biblical about it. We find out in the 6th season he is not allowed to directly harm any of the candidates. Again, getting way the hell ahead of ourselves here. Which sort of kind of creates some continuity errors, which is what I want to discuss here, because at this point it's the Man in Black posing as Christian Shepherd. I want to giggle every time I say the name Christian Shepherd.
I think it's in the final season. I want to say it's Kate in one of the Flash Sideways episodes gets told what his name is, and she just goes, "Christian Shepherd? Seriously?"
But we have this moment here where, it makes up most of the episode. Jack chasing the Man in Black through the woods in the shape or in the guise of his father, who basically leads him off of a cliff. Which, if this was intentional, is a really interesting way around of getting around the "can't harm them directly" rule. Do you think they were thinking that far ahead, or what are your thoughts on that, guys?
Yeah, I'm not sure I believe that they had that in mind either, because in the very next episode, we're going to find bodies in the caves, and Jack is going to look at the degraded clothes they're wearing and be like, well, it must have been probably around 40 or 50 years for clothes to decay like this. And of course, in the final season, we're going to find out, no, those bodies are literally millennia old. So, yeah, I think that's another thing where they were just letting the weirdness be their guiding star in the early episodes. Just let like crazy things happen. Just have like throw it in the air and we'll figure out how it fits together later. But the important thing is, as long as we don't cross off anything we've established already, and this early on we haven't established very much, we're fine. And it just seems like something they lost track of in the long run. Similarly, the rules about how the Man in Black can take forms and what happens to the original of the form he takes, very different between this and the way he appears in the last 2 seasons.
Yeah. I think I'm just trying to give them way too much credit here, because immediately after this, he does lead Jack to the caves, which sets up their residence for the rest of the season. Again, he's a doctor, no pun intended. Before we move on to House of the Rising Sun, what do you guys think of this episode, just as a whole? Like, I'm having trouble trying to describe this. Let me put it this way. So, I watched the first batch that we watched. I watched those episodes twice each. Well, I watched them with you guys when we watched them, and then I watched them again before we did the podcast. I had every intention of doing that again with these 4. I ended up watching House of the Rising Sun and Confidence Man, and then I looked at White Rabbit and the Moth, and I was like, I got it. I'm good.
I think what's interesting is, especially in the first season, you've kind of got 3 flavors of the flashback episode. You've got kind of your walkabout style, which is we're going to tell you something about this character that's going to just blow your mind and recontextualize everything that you thought you knew. And Confidence Man, I think, does that as well with Sawyer. You've got the kind of what you get with White Rabbit and with the Moth, which is we're going to take what you've seen of the character on the island and tease out a little more about how they got there, which is not really surprising, but it's like, okay, yeah, Jack is like this because of his dad. Charlie got into drugs because of his brother in the band. And then you have, I'd say, the tabula rasa style, which is just here's weird adventures this person's been having all over the world that, don't really tell you new stuff exactly, but just kind of hint at a lot of running craziness. And I feel like the ones like White Rabbit that don't have a huge revelation at the end are the ones that kind of live or die based on their character work. And maybe it's just knowing that we have so many daddy issues episodes ahead of us, it makes it hard to kind of go back and be like, yep, let's but it's easy to get overstuffed on that one a little bit.
Yeah. I will say though that Matthew Fox was clearly starting to settle into the role of Jack, because it's not quite as melodramatic in my opinion. There's still, that's there, it's a network TV show, but it really seems like at this point he had a handle on Jack. Robert, you made a really good observation there, which is Sawyer's the first episode that doesn't, I know we're jumping ahead, but I didn't want to lose this thread. I think Sawyer's is the first episode that doesn't end with one of the survivors about to get on the plane or setting them up to get on the plane.
Let's see. So Tabula Rasa is Kate getting arrested. Locke is him leaving the walkabout office. Charlie leaving his brother. Jen and Son. Yeah, Sawyer is the first one that doesn't even get him to Australia.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting. All right. Let's move on. We're going to talk about House of the Rising Sun. And my first thought when we were watching this episode was, what do the unnamed islanders think when they see this shit going on? I really wish there had been more of that throughout the series. We get a little bit of it with Nikki and Paulo later, but I would love there just be one cutaway to people like it's just a couple trying to eat the fish they caught, and they look up and there's Jen attacking Michael, and there's like, oh Christ, again.
Well, it does become kind of a thing that anytime they do like pluck a survivor from the background, I think what's the guy's name, Frogert, who becomes like the voice of the extras at the end of season 3 and season 4. That person's default attitude is just pissiness towards the main cast. Like Arst, I think, is sort of the embodiment of that, but just sort of like, you guys and your crap. Which, if you've seen them having their soap drama running around and you're just trying, not to starve to death, I think that, they're just constantly frustrated by all the whatever craziness these weirdos are dealing with, and, the rest of us are just trying not to die.
I think instead of director commentary, we should have extras commentary as from their point of view, be like, look at these stupid idiots. Why? Why do you have to do that?
Did you ever play the video game Biodomus?
I didn't even remember that there was one.
Yeah, it didn't sell really well, but the idea is you are playing as just like one of the extras, and you're just running around in the background, and you'll occasionally cross paths with Locke or Jack or Sawyer, and they'll just be like, oh, hey, thanks. You're doing good, buddy. Good luck with everything. It's awkward because only about half the cast showed up to do the voice for their roles, so some of them are passable imitations. The dude who plays Locke sounds like he's trying to do a racist, wise Native American. It's weird. But yeah, I feel like that was one of the attempts to try to be like, let's do that, and Nikki and Paula were sort of like, let's tell the story that could have been happening in the background the whole time. It never quite worked out.
No, it didn't. But thank you for bringing Frogurt to mind. I had completely forgot that, one, he was a character on this show, and two, that's what they called him.
Poor man Steve Buscemi.
Yeah, yep. All right, so I think we got a really interesting bit of early character work here. And now that I'm thinking about it, maybe I should have gone back and rewatched all of these in order. Is it this episode where Saeed is trying to ask Sun something, and we find out later she's pretending not to understand, and Kate points out she doesn't understand you, and Saeed says, yes, she does.
I think it's in White Rabbit. They're asking her where she got a bottle of water.
That's right, the episode prior.
And yeah, just starting to lay the foundation of Saeed as an interrogator, of someone who, it could just be him being like, what I'm asking isn't that complicated, she can figure it out. But we later find out, no, he's asked a lot of people questions and spent a lot of time reading faces.
Yeah. I love this episode, and I'm going to, these are way out of order from the way that I sent them to you, but Yeonjun Kim might just be one of the best performers on this show. Like, definitely so far in this season, but I think overall, holy shit, she's good.
Apparently she is a big deal in South Korea, that one of the creators was talking about it, and I think he used the phrase like the Julia Roberts of South Korea, which I don't know if that's overselling it or not, but apparently, yeah, like she is a very established and respected actress over there, and yeah, she brings it when she is showing up on this one.
Specifically, a lot of to-do gets made about the end of Walkabout and the wheelchair reveal. But her line to Michael, where she says in perfect English, I need to talk to you, is a huge moment. I think it's the second, as I put it in the notes, the second big Wham moment. And I don't mean the 80s band. And we're going to get another one later with Sawyer with the end of his arc. But here it's like, as far as like big character revelations, that's huge.
Yeah,
for her.
And just, again, for all of us watching it and seeing her in the early scenes trying to be like, okay, how is she playing that she understands but has to seem like she doesn't, for especially scenes where people are yelling at Jen or yelling at her. Yeah, she does a lot with just those little things. And I think, yeah, for what they give her character versus what she spends out of it, I think she might have the best like turnout of anybody in this cast. Like I do think she gets a little bit left in the background, unfortunately, as the show goes on. But man, when they let her step up to the plate, she knocks it out of the park.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I didn't like. It's weird, but post I need to talk to you. I didn't really take a lot of notes in these episodes. They're more like stray observations or stuff that you sent me, Robert. I had forgotten what a big moment that was, and I also felt like it came later in the season for some reason.
Well, the second big revelation related to that is when everybody else finds out,
right,
which is still to come, because Jen has no idea at the end of the episode, and so that's the thing they tease out for a lot of the rest of the season, is her finding little moments to talk to Michael, who's the only other person who knows. And yeah, I think it's also because that episode represents a moment where I feel like you can feel them shift what they were thinking of doing with Jen and Sun's relationship. Because I think their plan was always to be like, this used to be a happy marriage, and now it got to where it is on the island. But I think actually having Daniel Dae Kim and Yoonjin Kim play those scenes, and just Daniel Dae Kim getting to uncork some of that incredible charisma that, 20 years later we've seen him, use in a lot of very successful film projects. I think they were just sort of like, yeah, wow, people are going to get really invested in this. I don't think we can make a love triangle work, which seemed to be what they were looking to set up with Michael and Sun.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm glad they didn't.
Yeah. There's enough love triangles going on already, which is something, Robert, you sent that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But this last moment of House of the Rising Sun, where she's ready to walk out of the airport, does it work, in your opinion? Because what sways her from this plan that she has apparently put a lot of time into is gin and his flower.
Yeah.
Which is the very first thing we see him give her. It's a very sweet moment. But from the perspective of 2024, how do we feel about this moment?
It's tricky because it's easy to read it as she's in an abusive relationship and her abuser is using reminders of earlier happiness to keep her from leaving, even though Jen has no idea that that's what she's doing.
Right.
That it's a manipulator's tactic, and it's one that people see. Personally, I would not characterize this relationship as abusive. I'd say it's mutually unhappy. And again, when we see more of this from Jen's side of things, we also we get a little more sympathy for why he's built this emotional distance. And of course, this episode, she's the one who hits him. Like when she's asking him questions about why he's got blood on his hands, she slaps Jen, and while he reacts with a very scary, angry face, he never lays a hand on her. So.
Yeah, that's the way I always took it as, that's how I feel about it as well. It's not, I don't think he's abusive, not in the traditional term. I think he's in a really tough position because he had to agree to do these bad things so that he could marry Sun. And so it's almost, I love you so much, I will do these awful things, but these awful things make me
awful.
I mean,
they make me a person that is different from the one that you have been in love with.
Yeah, out of necessity.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, I don't have a problem with her not absconding with herself.
Right. This is the kind of thing where I wish we could have like an outside party. Well, I desperately want Katie, my wife, to watch the show and enjoy it. I just want that so bad, and I don't know why. I think it's because of the way that I was introduced to the show and went on to love it. I want to introduce other people to it and want them to love it. So Katie, I think, was there with us. She'd gotten there by the time we watched this. But if I would just love somebody now watching it for the first time, I'd love to hear their perspective on it. And if for some reason, if you are listening to this show and have made it this far and are watching it for the first time, hey, email me, david.longwalk@gmail.com. But yeah, I wanted to throw that out there just because of the way that we view relationships and moments like that has changed and shifted culturally. I thought it would be interesting to get your perspectives on. Before we move into the they were dead the whole time watch. Is it this episode or was it White Rabbit where Saeed tells Kate, you brought it up last week, Robert, we shouldn't have survived that in reference to the crash?
I think it's in the Moth because it's when they're walking to set up the transceiver. And
that's right.
And Saeed brings up the fact that the plane broke up and their piece crashed on the beach and most of them just got some minor scrapes. And he's like, how do you explain that? And all Kate can offer is, maybe we were just lucky. And it's like, that's not really an answer, but what other answer can you find at that point?
Yeah. Yeah. They're making it harder and harder for me to make this argument that people who think they were dead the whole time are idiots. I still think that, but these early episodes are making it difficult for me to make that point.
I think in the context of where the show ends up and the entire story they tell, no, it's just a matter of like, it's wrong. That's not the interpretation that the show gives us. But if you're watching it, week to week, yeah, it was definitely a strong theory. And again, I mean, we see a dead man vanish from his coffin, or at the end of White Rabbit. So, who's to say like what the rules are in wherever they've ended up?
And I think that's just kind of it. Nothing is off the table on this island at this point. It's you can't say, oh well, that can't happen or that shouldn't happen. Well, anything can happen.
And that's kind of
it's magic.
Well, that's kind of the thrust of Locke's conversation with Jack when he finds him in the jungle in White Rabbit, is to say, as a doctor, you'd probably normally think that whatever you're dealing with is just some kind of crazy hallucination, but maybe in this place, things can happen differently. And while Locke doesn't specifically cite his own experience, that's clearly informing him. And it's just in the context of where their relationship will go, Jack and Locke, it's interesting how receptive Jack seems in that conversation. That he's obviously very burned out and tired, but he seems to be like listening and considering what Locke says. And given how they become pretty antagonistic, I would say, by the end of this season and never really come back from that, it's an odd glimpse at like, wow, maybe these two probably could have been friends in another context.
Yeah. Well, I think it's time that we go on to The Moth, a.k.a. the biopic of Charlie Pace as portrayed by Dominic Monaghan in the Oscar race.
VH1's Drive Shaft Special.
Submitted for your review. Man, what do we think about this episode?
I think on paper it's about the most like cliched, ham-handed, like, man, look at this sweet Catholic boy who just wanted to make his music and then got, seduced by drugs and loose women. To the extent that it works, I think it does work because Dominic Monaghan commits so hard. And I actually think Neil Hopkins, who plays his brother, I think does a really nice job of just showing how there was always this one thing in him that came out, even if, again, the reveal in the last flashback of him with like the sweater and the glasses is maybe a little, see how like a big sober sign flashing over his head.
Well, all I could think of was the John Mulaney joke that he does about, and she was wearing glasses to show that time had passed. Literally in the last scene, Liam is wearing a sweater, like a V-neck sweater over a white button down, and he's got glasses on to show that time has passed.
He went from rock to prep.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Because that's what happens.
Which is, Australia is not normally where British people go when they need to get their act together, so that's kind of impressive how that worked out.
That is a good observation.
I was also very surprised to learn that the guy who plays Liam is not actually British, because he nails that accent pretty well, like playing off Monaghan.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I had no idea.
Apparently, he heard they were looking to cast an English actor, so he showed up doing it at the audition and tried to keep them from finding out that it was affected for as long as he could until he'd gotten the part.
Wow. Well, good on him. Like I said, I didn't go back and rewatch this one just because I think one and done. All right, we got it. This is going to be the plot of every biopic to come out for the next 20 years. Strangely enough, Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story, is going to end up doing it better than any of them.
That's Charlie Pace. He's got to think about his whole life before he plays a concert.
And he never once paid for drugs. Not once. All right, that's it. We're canceling the show, and we're just doing a Dewey Cox retrospective podcast.
No. I'm out.
Oh, damn.
I know.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Well, just again, yeah, the present day story of him dealing with his withdrawal, which I've never been on heroin or had to, go through withdrawal for it, but I'm told it kind of destroys you physically, especially if you're someone who's been like a long time user. So
I think it can actually like literally kill you.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reason you have things like, I think, methadone and other like medications that are specifically designed to help you wean off. So little disappointed that it's like, okay, he looks really bad at the end of this episode, and then at Confidence Man, he's basically back to 100%. It's a case where I wish they'd tease that out a little bit more, even if, again, on a weekly network TV show, continuity was a limited thing. But
well, and also, I know it's kind of a cheesy answer, but a lot of that can be contributed to the island.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Yeah. Because, I mean, obviously, it's got healing properties or healing abilities.
And I would have to look it up. Was Charlie listed as one of the candidates?
That I'm not sure about, though. I think weren't all of the main castaways included? I'm trying to remember if there was any specific one who wasn't.
Yeah, I don't remember at this point. That's 6 seasons ahead. But yeah, there's really not a whole lot to be said about this episode. No huge revelations, I don't think.
Michael used to do construction work.
Yeah, well, that's the first time we find out about that. Jack almost gets crushed, but then he doesn't because he's Jack. Anything that you guys really want to talk about when it comes to the Moth?
We have that moment where Saeed gets knocked out right as he's about to locate.
Oh yeah.
Working on the first of several advanced technological devices he will like cobble together using his incredible electronic skills, and the first of several that will be failed or destroyed through no fault of his own.
And not a single one of them made out of a coconut, which I feel like is a real missed opportunity to get some Gilligan's Island shenanigans in there.
When you guys first watched that, did you? This isn't one of the biggest mysteries of the show, but it is one that I think it's most of the first season before we get a confirmation. Who did you guys think had attacked Saeed?
Well, we don't. It's not too much longer now until we get introduced to the others. So at that time, I was just like, oh, clearly it's one of them. Even though we didn't know about them at the time, we at least knew that there was some other entity on the island. I just assumed it was that.
Yeah. I don't, probably at the time, I probably never gave it a thought. Just went, oh no.
I'm sure we'll find out. Yeah, at the time I wasn't sure, but by the end of Confidence Man, I was like, okay, so it must have been Locke. Because, yeah, his... did I hit you, Saeed? I certainly didn't. And to prove how much I didn't, let me point you in the direction of somebody I'd sure like for you to believe attacked you.
Well, let's just go ahead and dive into Confidence Man, because Locke doesn't even outright say, no, it wasn't me. He doesn't deny it. He just shifts the blame immediately over to Sawyer. How did I want to put this? Raise your hand if you love Josh Holloway as Sawyer, and then let's fight over who loves him the most. That's
Hands going up?
Yeah. I don't know why. I don't know what it is about his Southern charm. This episode really cements that Sawyer's like a long runner in this cast of the survivors. He gets like the third big revelatory moment of the show. He really steals. This is going to sound weird to say about the episode that is about him, that is Sawyer's flashback episode, but God, he just steals this whole thing.
Yeah, I think what he really nails is that he's very good at suffering, not just physically, which I think Sawyer is probably one of the characters who takes the biggest beating over the course of the show. I mean, he gets like stabbed and tortured in this episode. He gets punched in the face multiple times. He's over the course of the show, he's going to get shot, tortured. I think he gets like heart surgery at one point, but also just, he plays the wound at the heart of this character really well, in a way that as he's doing all these terrible things, just, we spend most of the episode thinking he's just letting Shannon suffer for no good reason. And we find out he has no power to stop it, but he's also wasting their time by making them think he can help. And yet he still keeps your sympathy, because you're just like, wow, nobody else on this island hates him as much as he hates himself. And like where he, in the same way that like Kate has sort of used her blank slate to be like, okay, now I can finally relax and breathe free for a minute, Sawyer, it feels like, is in some ways feels more miserable than ever, because he's like, well, now how am I going to, who's going to pay me back for the things I've done? And we eventually see in his episode that what got him to Australia is yet another terrible thing that he's got to atone for, and that he can't really make right. Oh man, yeah, that scene when he's getting tortured, and just the way he I still remember the monologue that Saeed gives as he's setting down to work with the bamboo shoots was one that I just remembered word for word even before we started the rewatch. We don't have bamboo in Iraq. We do have reeds. And the effect is the same when the shoots are inserted under the fingernails. And it's just like,
We also get that great moment where Sawyer, who is a pretty good judge of character for most of the show, tells him, I don't think you've ever tortured anybody. And all Saeed can say is, unfortunately for the both of us, that's not true. I don't even know what else to say. I didn't even, aside from just how much I love this episode, I didn't take any notes about it. The ending, I think, is perfectly executed. We think, based on hearing Kate read the letter, that we're building up to, Sawyer is setting up this man to murder his wife and child, and that's what we're going to end the episode
Or
on.
he's going to kill his wife, then himself and his child will...
Oh, that's right.
yeah,
That's right. Yes.
will write the letter.
Yes, murder-suicide. And instead, no, we get the first inkling that Sawyer actually does have a heart of gold. Do they ever follow up on the fact that he does not give his benefactor back his money?
I think that's just sort of implied to be one of the reasons that he's kind of constantly, like, that's just another person that he's gotten on the wrong side of and that he needs to keep moving around. Because I do think in almost all the episodes we see him in, he's in a place of sort of desperation. That he's the kind of guy who can probably... He's never pissed anybody off so badly that he can't just move somewhere else and start over, but there are just a lot of places he can't go back to.
I will say his last monologue is when he's talking to Kate. It is one of my pet peeves, and when it comes to writing, especially in like a show like this, which is know when to end the line, because he gives Kate that whole monologue setting up like, well, his life was basically ruined because of a confidence man, but then circumstances conspired to where he had to become one in order to survive, and then he's like, so I became the thing that I hated. And I was like, all right, we could have ended this a line earlier. I became Sawyer. All right, we could have ended this 2 lines earlier now.
Yeah, I will say that does set up one of my favorite act outs that we get down the road in season 3 when he's in the brig I think it was the Black Rock with Anthony Cooper. And we get that great moment of, well, my name's Sawyer too. I'm just like, oh, that's... another moment that I'm very much looking forward to seeing again.
Yeah. Well, that is a good lead in to our next like actual discussion topic for this episode, which is the complete and utter lack of subtlety that I mentioned. One of the biggest ones being the musical choice for I think it's White Rabbit, which is the song Are You Sure This Is Where You Want to Be? The line, which the chorus plays over a shot of Kate sitting on the beach. Are you sure this is where you want to be? And I was like, oh, man, Jesus Christ. And I feel like I need to point out here, you can love something a lot and still be critical of it, which is why I think I'm being so harsh on White Rabbit. But God, that moment was it was very, very cringy.
And we also had, at the end of Tabula Rasa, we have the song Wash Away playing. You know, I got troubles, but not today. They've gone and washed away. They're going to wash away.
Yeah.
We talked last episode about how brilliant the orchestral scores are for this show, but yeah, anytime they have someone playing like an actual piece of pop music or whatever it is, usually pretty heavy-handed, which isn't to say they can't work. Like, I still remember, I think it's Make Your Own Kind of Music is the one that opens up season 3, and then season 2 is, oh shoot, I'm blanking. It's the first time we meet Desmond.
Isn't Desmond Make Your Own Kind of Music?
Is that Make Your Own Kind of Music?
I think that's the start of season 2.
Okay, yeah, the one, I forgot what the record was that Juliet plays, but...
I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, but...
I mean, but then...
I can't remember it, but it's good.
Well, then later on in The Moth, we get a literal explanation of how cocoons and moths and butterflies work from Locke to Charlie.
A very special monologue by John Locke.
And then later, he ends up in a cocoon of his own accidental making and then has to emerge from it.
We get the shot of his hand, like, pushing through the earth as he escapes.
Yeah, very subtle there. Of course, there's the episode title, House of the Rising Sun. And then when they find the bodies in the cave, they find a little bag with a white and black rock in them. Several episodes after, we've had Locke hold up the 2 pieces from the, what was the game?
Parcheesi?
Parcheesi board.
No, sorry, backgammon.
Backgammon, yeah. So what do you think? What's your favorite of these unsubtle moments? And do any of them, despite their complete and utter lack of subtlety, do they still work? What do you guys think?
I kind of admire it as a sort of thematic shot calling, because at this point there really isn't a sense on the island of like there being any kind of light and dark side to anything. It's just they've crashed and they're trying to survive, and we're getting hints that they've got their stories and their emotional baggage. So we're still a ways off from the idea of there being any kind of like bigger struggle between good and evil, light, darkness, anything like that. So while it's it's definitely a heavy-handed moment, I admire that there's a certain point or a certain ambitiousness by the show's writers to have those moments to be like, we are easing you into a story that is going to be about much bigger things than people not dying in a plane crash. So the individual moments are heavy, but at the same time, it's part of that gonzo scope that I love about the show. That like I'm glad that they took those shots, because a lot of them are really going to pay off in the long run.
Cara, what are your thoughts?
So I don't remember a lot from 20 years ago. I barely remember 20 minutes ago. Is subtlety, was it a thing back in those days? Couldn't even tell you like what shows were on 20 years ago without looking it up.
Not so much on network TV.
No. That's actually a shockingly good point, is how much TV has evolved over the last 20 years.
It is shocking because I came up with it. Thanks.
You're welcome. That's not how I meant that. But, I had not considered that. I just imagine the writer's room where whoever was in charge of episode 6 leaned forward, like I'm leaning forward now to look at you two guys and going, all right, hear me out. We call it House of the Rising Sun. Because it's about sun. And then somebody else was like, give this man a raise.
Well, let's appreciate for a moment that given that Sun's husband worked in the food service industry, that's established in this episode, we never got an episode down the road entitled Gin and Tonic. So, at least there was some stopgap in there.
That is a missed opportunity, I feel, actually. I'm going to prove myself wrong there with that one. I would have loved to see an episode called Gin and Tonic, especially if we could get Snoop in there as well. As cringeworthy as some of this stuff is, some of it still does work, especially because, like you pointed out, Robert, it's going to be a while before we really understand the full scope of the black and white. All right, Robert, you wanted to talk about the romantic subplots that we've got going on here. What were your thoughts on that?
It's just interesting because this is where I feel like they really put kind of the gas pedal down on it. They've had a few moments of like teasing and flirtatiousness between different characters, but this is the first time they really lock into, Jack and Kate have a flirty moment, but it ends because Jack is really bent on getting everyone to the caves and Kate doesn't want to be tied in there. And you obviously have a lot of Confidence Man turning around on Kate and Sawyer's attraction, or maybe more Sawyer's attraction to Kate, but she definitely seemed kind of into the kiss. You've got the backstory of Jen and Sun. You have Sawyer and Claire get their moment with the jar of peanut butter. So
Charlie and Claire?
What did I say?
Sawyer.
Oh. Josh Holloway's got that chemistry with everybody. Charlie and Claire have the moment with peanut butter. Again, it's a cast full of really attractive people who, despite the horrors of a plane crash, all still have access to, skincare and, hair management products. Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting to look in the course of the show, some of the relationships that worked. Like, I do think that the dynamic between Kate and Sawyer is a strong one, and I think carries through a lot of the big moments that we're going to see coming down the road. And Charlie and Claire also just adorable together.
I just love them.
And although it's too soon, I do enjoy watching the subtle chemistry between Boone and Shannon.
Stop it.
Yeah, that.
I hate him and her.
That was such a weird choice. Oh, I mean, credit Maggie Grace, who is not at all a bad actress, but just, she acts the hell out of the asthma scene, and that moment where she asks Boone not to leave her is a really very nice, vulnerable change. But
it's to both of their credits that we hate their characters so much.
Oh, yeah. If you can make me hate you this many years later, you've done something.
Yeah, but I'm just I'm thinking about for you guys, are there any relationships that you're actually looking forward to seeing play out more? Like, I remember Sawyer and Juliet, which sort of felt like just kind of a let's see how these two work together, and then ended up being kind of an emotional anchor for the last few seasons of the show, versus the ones that we're trying to do, and I don't think ever really quite clicked. Like, I actually don't buy Jack and Kate that much as a couple. It just sort of feels like, well, he's the good guy that she should be attracted to as a foil to her attraction to Sawyer. And yeah, just, I don't know, maybe it's just that Jack seems too, like, noble spirited to actually be horny for somebody. But
well, I am looking forward to seeing Juliet hit the scene, because love triangles, boring. Love quadrangles. Now you take a fucking firecracker like Juliet and throw her right into the middle of this Jack, Kate, Sawyer nonsense we got going on, and all of a sudden it's interesting again.
do you remember when there was like a 1-episode arc where they decided to put Ben in there as well?
I don't remember that.
Yeah, there's an episode where it's just like, oh yeah, by the way, Ben is like obsessed with Juliet, and he wants,
yes,
and yeah, he's gonna come after Jack and he's done it to other men and then it felt like everybody after that was just like, wait, this seems like it wildly diminishes Ben as a character. Yeah, let's never speak of that again.
Yeah, that's also like, that's mid-season 3, right?
Yeah,
where things were just kind of off the wall. I can't wait till we get to that portion of the series where we're like, what the fuck is happening here?
When Gina and I were watching it a couple of years back, I was trying to get her into it. We got to the 3rd season, and I think I probably made it easier for her to take a break from it by constantly saying things like, look, okay, you're so close to when it's going to get amazing again. Just hold on. Just stay with it. But yeah, we're about to see Saeed's episode next week, and that's going to be, I think, one of the weirdest cases of them having in flashback a very like powerful and affecting romantic story that's going to kind of just get train wrecked by the decision to give Saeed a love interest on the island. In what remains one of the weirdest... No, sorry, wait. What does this character see in the other character? Pairings in TV history.
Yeah, and lest we forget, there was a brief period where they kind of hinted at Saeed and Kate as well. Because they end up going off on their own a lot, and he shows a lot of concern for her with that moment where he doesn't want to leave her alone with Sawyer.
Yeah.
Well, I can't imagine anything weirder than that relationship, too.
I could see it kind of working. It's just hard to imagine it like a big dramatic moment that clicks it, as opposed to just these are two, attractive people who enjoy being around each other and eventually realize they're dating. And the way the show is set up does not really allow for that. This is a show where people have like passionate revelations and, big dramatic connections.
Before we move on to, I think was probably the last topic of this episode, I do want to ask you guys something. There's a joke on Family Guy many years ago, very early Family Guy, where they do a lost joke. And then, of course, because of the way Family Guy humor works, they do a cutaway gag to what's supposed to be Jack and Kate on the island. I think the setup is like, we're sweatier than all the characters on Lost or something like that. And so it's cartoon Jack and cartoon Kate just pouring sweat and panting. And I remember thinking, oh, that's funny. And now watching the show again, I'm like, holy shit. Matthew Fox was fucking sweaty and panting constantly. Half of his lines, I feel, are him just like gasping for breath. Did either of you notice that as well? Please tell me I'm not alone here.
No, but I bet you I will now. Thank you.
I think that's a particular... When he gets into like a higher dramatic gear, I think that's something that comes out a lot.
The sweat or the panting?
I was going to say the panting a little bit more, because, even in the sweat I'll give a little pass to, because, tropical island,
It's hot
they're
there.
all, yeah.
It's got to be hot and humid.
I joked a minute ago about how they all, like, their skin and their hair all looks good, but I will say the costume and makeup teams do a pretty great job of keeping everybody looking a little greasy and putting like sweat stains and, stains and other like raggedy elements to all the clothing. But yeah, it does seem like it comes out with Jack a lot, especially. I don't know if that was just maybe the actor, again, because they are filming in Hawaii, if that was just something that was harder on him than,
Maybe he's just a sweaty person.
Which
Probably.
I'm sympathetic
I can
to.
relate.
Yeah.
Yes. I look at the sun and I'm drenched in sweat.
All right. So I think the last thing that I had down here, let me consult, is something else, Robert, that you brought up that you want to talk about, which was Jack versus Locke. the early setup for an ongoing feud. So what are your thoughts on Jack and Locke?
Well, I mentioned earlier just how interesting that conversation they have in the jungle is after when, Jack kind of admits that he's seeing visions of something that can't be there, and Locke just encourages him to treat it as possibly being real and just to pursue it. They haven't quite locked in, no pun intended, they haven't quite set in on the idea of Jack as kind of the rationalist and Locke as the more mystical voice in dealing with the weirdness of the island. I was looking at that and trying to think, so when does that hostility between them really start? And I think for me, my guess would probably be when Boone dies. That I think is something that Jack does blame Locke for, and that he never fully forgives him for that. And I think from then on, there's just an antagonism that all through the storyline with the hatch of just, Jack will tolerate Locke, but is never fully going to be anything more than just, okay, I have to put up with you, but I'm this close to being done with your crap right now. And again, that's going to pay off really well. I'm especially thinking of the end of season 4 when they're deciding whether or not to call the freighter, and all Locke can do is beg, and Jack just tells him no. And then what will ultimately be paid off in that conversation that Jack has with the Man in Black, where he finally says, I wish I could have told John Locke that he was right about a lot of things. So it's an interesting dynamic that, again, they could not have had any idea where this was going to go, but to see it at this early stage just, sets up a lot of stuff down the road.
It does, and it's very easy to see this going in another direction if Locke and Jack were to team up. If one of them were to ever to get the other fully over on their side, I don't want to call them a power couple, but that's the first phrase that comes to mind. They would have been an unstoppable force.
Yeah.
All right. Any other thoughts? Any wrap-up observations?
There'll probably be episodes where we can dig into this more, but I will say, given that that Lost is set in a world where the supernatural is something that can happen, it would be very easy for Jack to just be the idiot who needs to wise up. That the guy who just keeps trying to find rational explanations, while Locke is the guy who's smart enough to see what's really going on. And I'll give the writers credit that they don't really have it be that one-sided, that Locke's belief in something he doesn't fully understand gets him and other people in trouble just as often, if not more often, than it helps. So, yeah, I think we'll probably talk about more of that when we get to the Hatch episodes.
Cara?
I don't know why this is in my head, but it just kind of dawned on me that, I absolutely adore Locke. He is one of my favorite characters, but it goes against what I would probably like in real life, because I'm a very rational person, I think, except for my certain irrational things. But yeah, it's Jack should be the person that I would gravitate towards, but not even a little bit. It's just Locke, and I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what it is. He has this little I don't know, something his little. I hate to say it's like a twinkle in his eye, but I don't know. Yeah, I love the way. I love his character and the way he plays it.
So fictional Cara and fictional Locke sitting in a tree.
Uh-huh.
I think what it is, a lot of the appeal is all of us, whatever we believe about miracles and the supernatural in the world that we live in, I think we like to believe that if something like that did happen to us, if we faced something that was overwhelming proof of greater forces in the world, that we could let that change our lives, that we could let that transform us, and that we wouldn't just try to keep going on the same way we had before. And Locke is all about that change.
Very much. And I guess, if I had my paralysis cured, I probably would fall into that category.
Well, and I think it goes even beyond just having his paralysis cured, because everything, all of Locke's skill set, everything, he was made to come to this island. He's the most proficient hunter on the island by far. He knows how to find water. He knows how to track animals. He knows how to kill, ensnare and kill a boar.
Which, of course, he does, because that's why he wanted to go on the walkabout.
Mm-hmm.
And, he was like, no, I actually can do this. And they're like, no, you're in a wheelchair. You can't.
Yeah, and I think for him as a character, the island would be, no more definitive proof than that things happen for a reason.
Yeah.
To him, and that everything that he has suffered in his life, he suffered for a purpose.
That he had a destiny, and he's living it.
Yeah, which I think is, it sounds like a line that's probably going to get said later. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
There was one other thing I wanted to mention that an interesting thing about Sawyer, talking about like the foreshadowing or writer's decision down the road. Given how so much of this Sawyer's kind of on the seedier side of the island, he's got the gun that he doesn't tell anybody about. He's hoarding items. He's maybe got the inhalers. He's doing all this. It's interesting that the first time we see, this community of survivors that are trying to build their own little society, that they need to have the equivalent of law enforcement. That Jin attacks Michael and they have to subdue him and restrain him until they can figure out what's going on. Sawyer is with Saeed breaking up the fight and helping to subdue Jin, which, might have just been to give him something to do. But it's the first hint of something that they're really going to get into down the road, which is if his life had gone differently, Sawyer could have been a pretty good cop.
Well, and he also had the handcuffs on him for no explicit reason. Like, why were you walking around with those, Sawyer?
You never know when they might come in handy.
Shannon was trying to barter with him for sunscreen. This could have been his counteroffer.
Yeah,
It's true.
That felt sleazy.
no more sleazy than some of the things he says to the women on the island. So.
Yeah.
We didn't touch on Sawyer's casual racism, which is some topic or just a random observation that I threw in there. But Katie had come in to watch these episodes with us at the point where where Sawyer refers to Saeed as Captain Falafel, and Katie's jaw dropped. And I was like, oh, right, to an outside person. Yeah. Again, this was 2004, and Sawyer's supposed to be pretty racist. Even by today's standards, Captain Falafel's pretty fucked up.
It's just, it was the time where that could be like, he's kind of being a jerk, but in a goofy way, versus today, I think that would be used to establish, okay, this character is bad and you should not like them.
Uh-huh. Oh, man. But anyway, as much as I've spent this episode shitting on White Rabbit, the end of it does give us this from Jack. Last week, most of us were strangers, but we're all here now, and God knows how long we're going to be here. But if we can't live together, we're going to die alone. The first instance of what could very easily be the tagline for the entire show, and that I just sort of accidentally used as my sign-off at the end of the last two episodes. I really should find something else to use there. But just the first, I feel like, great moment from Matthew Fox delivering that monologue. I talked earlier in the episode about, I feel like he had come into the character at that point, and I feel like that settled it right there. That monologue, that line from him. So let's talk about this next batch of episodes that we've got to watch and discuss, because next we get Saeed's flashback, followed by Claire's, raised by another. And then we get, like I mentioned earlier, All the Best Cowboys Have Daddy Issues, which is our second Jack episode. And I feel like we should kind of round these 2 weeks out there, and I think we should do these three next time, because then we kind of start over the rotation after that with after All the Best Cowboys Have Daddy Issues, we get another Kate episode, which feels like I said, like the rotation is starting over again. So if that's cool with you guys, that's where I think we should go next week is Saeed, Claire, and then Jack Part 2.
Yeah, I'd say there's probably enough that happens in those episodes for us to dig into.
Yeah. Well, in the meantime, Robert, if people want to follow you online someplace that isn't Twitter, where can they do that at?
They can't. I am a shadow, ever present, never seen. Even though shadows are often seen. That's a bad comparison.
I was going to say, wait a minute. How many flaws can I pick out?
Are you a vampire? You don't have a shadow?
Yeah, sometimes I plug my Instagram account, but I honestly still don't use that very much. So, yeah, there's not a lot of places to find me.
That's fair. Cara, what about you?
Instagram at HistoryNerd1861.
Nice. And if you want to follow me online, you can also do that on Instagram. I guess that's just the social media of choice for all the hosts on this network now. And you can follow me at DB Hensley. If you want to keep up with Long Walk Productions, you can visit us online at longwalk.us to see more of our original work or hear past episodes that are no longer streaming. You can follow the YouTube links in the show notes. Thank you very much for listening, and if you enjoy this show or any of the shows on the Long Walk Podcast Network, please make sure to leave us a rating and a review on whatever platform you are listening on.